Hello and welcome to the Agile State of Mind. I'm your host, Maria Chec, and today I'm joined by someone who knows a thing or two about making data work for teams. Benji Huser-Berta. Hi, Benji. Nice to see you again.
Thank you for the invite.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you for accepting it already the second time. So we already spoke about flow metrics and the charts and how we can visualize them. And today we will talk about something very interesting and very important for our maybe mental sanity, which is Monte Carlo simulations, and how instead of using the estimates and estimations and getting burned in the process, we can actually leverage the Monte Carlo simulations, which I will explain in a bit. And why Benji? Benji is not only my fellow Pro Kanban trainer, but also experienced speaker and in international conferences, especially giving workshops on probability, on estimations, and Monte Carlo simulations. So here's your person. And he also has a deep expertise in flow metrics and the visualization, because he even created his own tool to visualize everything that we will be talking today about. And I hope you will show us the tool so we can see how we can leverage. Right?
Yes, I plan to do that, yes.
Great. You can follow Benji on LinkedIn and also in his excellent Substack publication, Let People Work, where he explains a lot because you actually work in that, right? For a long time, you were actually not only preaching that, but also doing that daily with the teams and living what you talk about, right?
Yeah, so most of the things you talked about in previous episodes, also like things like no estimates and so on, I've experienced that firsthand, and like all the things I'm sharing today or we are sharing are things that I'm using in practice kind of day in, day out.
Great. And that's what I'm after, because I know there is a lot of theory that we can talk about, but what we really want to show is what is the problem that we are facing with the estimations and how we can solve it, and everything in a very practical way because we use it daily with the team. So let's get into it and you will see. I would like to start from the problem. That's why I will share the screen, because I created this very ugly slide deck where I will show why this matters. Because, you know, sometimes I feel like we are talking about something and we never stated the problem that we want to solve. And then it's like, okay, I understand you want to do Monte Carlo simulations. Sounds super cool. Oh, it actually was done in the Second World War. But why are you actually using that? So this is precisely what I would like to say. So I took some screenshots of metrics from real teams. And as you can see here, we have issue story points on one axis and work days in transition status, which means how many days it took. So we have basically cycle time down and the story points that it had. And as you see here, we can have 1, 2, 3, and they can take from 0.5 days to 6 days. Of course, they can be also longer. One took more than 24 days, like 25 days. So that's my question. Like, we estimate, we put so much effort in it. We create those very thorough analysis of something that will maybe happen or maybe not. And then once we look at how long it actually takes, it doesn't really matter that much if it's a 1 or a 3. And the same in a different team, as you see here, 1, 2, 3, they're almost the same. Then 5 might be even longer, but still might be less long than those outliers here that still had less, right? So that's just a very eye-opening moment for me when I think about we put so much time into estimation, and then does it really make sense? What's the value for money? Not to mention the randomness. So there's also this part of randomness of the system, and that's very important for why we want to talk about Monte Carlo simulation, because that's actually embracing the randomness. We will talk about it. But first, let's state why. So even if you are great in estimating, and some teams are not so bad, typically what we estimate is what's here in the light blue. So those are different sprints. And we have number of days on average, of course, because it's Jira, that they spend in a status, right? So then the light blue is in progress when the coding was happening. So it's basically coding. Then we have in review. So because there was no waiting for review, so waiting and in review is in one status. Took normally double the time. That's not really what we estimate when we estimate.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have the waiting for release, and the worst one, which is the on hold. And I actually don't hate so much this on hold column, because I know that this team actually saw that they spent waiting more than doing, and they wanted to understand why, and they started writing always the reason of, usually it was a dependency with another team, they had to wait. And as you see, this is something, it's like, how can you predict and prepare for this kind of randomness in your system? Which items will have more dependencies, less dependencies? Suddenly there was 0 on hold. Maybe they removed the column because they were like fed up. I don't know. But as you see here, it's super random. Anything from your side?
Yeah,
Benji?
I think it's important to understand or get this understanding out to everyone who is interested, that it's not about limiting the variability that we have in our work, right? We're usually working in like complex environments. We will not be able to predict everything. Like now you showed some graphs, and maybe we can do 1 or 2 things about it to make it a bit less random, but I think there will always be some variability in it. And what we're going to dive deeper today is maybe how can we accept or embrace this variability and still be able to create kind of meaningful plans or forecasts or whatever we want to call it. It's not about reducing the randomness totally.
Exactly, because I think that's actually like our wishful thinking when we do estimates, right? Oh,
Yes.
next time you have to have this into consideration. There will be this, and you have to like predict what might have happened in the future. And
yeah,
it's
this
impossible.
is usually okay, let's take the estimate, do it times 3 plus 10% buffer for whatever random reason, right? Everybody has probably their own formula in their head, at least.
Exactly. And that's where we kind of move in the totally wrong direction. And here we would like to like course correct and see that there is maybe a better way, a easier way to approach this. And one before we finish with the problem, this was very eye-opening for me. When this is one team that got some new people to help, the typical, can actually 9 women create 1 baby in a month instead of like we know? So this was happening, and it was very interesting to see that, especially given when I start working with new teams and I go to see, okay, so how do you plan? What do you do? They have those very heavy capacity planning spreadsheets. And some even call them like unlimited super spreadsheets. And it's mind-blowing how much time we spend to actually calculate all of this. And then what happens is, intuitively, we would think more people, more productivity, more things done. And this, you see, in one is the capacity per sprint, which is like person hours, depending on the number of people and the number of days that are being worked, right? Because sometimes we have holidays, sometimes we have bank holidays and so on. And then the throughput, so items delivered. So it's actually flow metric. And then it's like, yeah, here we had more, so it's more, but here we had a bit less, and it was so many fewer. And then here it was quite stable when it comes to capacity, but the throughput was so different. And then you think, and then I asked the person that did this, and it was like, wow, you have so many metrics, we can do so much with it. And he was like, Yeah, I always check the capacity because, of course, intuitively, if there's more people, there will be more things done. And I'm like, can you really say it based on what you see here? So, I think I always also argue a bit with people who say, we do it because it's intuitive. How many times in Kanban we have checked that what we think is intuitive is actually like, let's open everything and work on everything at the same time. That's intuitively faster, right? And then we know, like, yeah, maybe that's not the best way about it. So I just wanted to show this one to say that you can plan the capacity and do all those very complex calculations. Not necessarily it will give you the data that you actually expect.
Yeah, so, I mean, the cool thing is you have the data, so you can check. Maybe it works perfectly fine for you. I think then you don't have a problem. But if it doesn't, which I believe is most often the case, then think about what else is there to do. Because, and I think you mentioned it, there's a lot of time going into creating these plans. And if they're not useful, then maybe it's better to not do that and focus on something else.
Exactly. But I think the most important thing is we sometimes get into this inertia of, oh, I have, I'm checking it every time. I'm checking. I have so much data. Are you looking at the data?
Yeah.
Is your data telling you that what you're doing is like worth keep on doing? Maybe not.
The goal isn't to collect data. It's like to look at it and draw conclusions or maybe run experiments and see how it behaves, right? That you're actually improving.
Exactly. And maybe you can remove a lot of waste. So this is 80-20% principle that what it actually gives me the 80% of value. What can I cut stuff because it's not really bringing me value and I'm spending a lot of time. We have the stage is set. And now let's start from scratch. Like, what is Monte Carlo simulation? Because, there are many people that, like, I thought it was like something from Kanban that probably Dan Vacanti invented. And it's Kanban thing.
It is not, right? You already mentioned it's like a Second World War thing, and Dan is quite old, but he's not that old.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my question. If you could explain a little, or we can explain it together, that it's not really even something that comes from engineering, right? Yeah. It's used in many other places.
Yeah, I'm not a perfect historian. You may actually know better. Also, that it has like some Polish connection, right? Which ties to you. But as far as I remember, it was like developed before or during the Second World War, and it's kind of related to the invention of the atomic bomb, right? Because they wanted to simulate some stuff, and back in those days, you didn't really have fast computers yet, as things were really just developing there. So they needed a method to try kind of or simulate different outcomes, and then they could see how likely is it that something happens. That's very brief in a nutshell how Monte Carlo works, and maybe we go a bit deeper. But
yeah, I think we don't need to go much deeper. I really like the Polish because the name was Stanisław, which is a very Polish name. So it was a Polish American scientist who was working on it, and he got sick and he started playing solitaire, the card game. And then he noticed like to actually you cannot predict if you win or not. You have to try like 100 times and like play 100 times and count the wins, and then you get some idea of how many of the predictability of winning, right? So that was then used in the Manhattan Project, and since then it has been used especially in investing, in predicting like some very in some calculations that are very random, which is also like if it's complex, it's usually random. For example, harvest, like that is like a very simple example. You want to know how much can you harvest this year, but you need to count for so many different variables, even the weather. Like, will it be hot, too hot? It will be dry. It will be rainy, too rainy, right? And how possible are those different weather conditions? Because they don't happen often, but they happen. They are the outliers that happen. So what we do, we take some different options that can affect our outcomes, and then from that we make a lot of simulations to see, okay, how really possible are those outcomes, those unwanted and those wanted outcomes. So we don't talk here about averages, because on average you can be wrong on average. We talk about with what kind of predictability and with what probability we can get to certain outcomes. And I was wondering, okay, so how do we even gather all that data? How do I know? Like, how do I put that there is a draft or there is a flood? But in our case, when it comes to predicting the work, so planning a project or planning a sprint, we have a lot of data already in our system. So it's only so we already have those variables, and as you saw, we showed there are so many outliers. So those outliers are really important for us because they can make or break the prediction, right? So this really helps to, okay, all those different our context, our dependencies, our system that is unpredictable and random. If we take all those dots from that, then we can use them to use this to do the simulations. That was quite a long explanation.
Mm-hmm.
But
it was understandable.
Okay. I think this is how I actually got it. So I just wanted to explain to everyone how this works. So, and what do we use? So let's talk about, okay, we know already estimates are not the greatest way to predict. There is something called Monte Carlo simulation. What do we need to run it?
So you mentioned we have a lot of data already. The even better thing is we don't need a lot of data. We basically need one specific metrics, which is throughput over a specific time frame. So maybe I can share something quickly.
So we need just one metric, but in many weeks, let's say, right? Like,
yeah, or many days. So usually I would say you need from 2 weeks to maybe 3 months, depends a bit on what you want to forecast. Because, and I think this is the important part, you mentioned like we can apply this in an unpredictable system. The assumption is your system stays equally unpredictable as it has in the past, right? So whatever your input is, you assume you more or less will behave in a similar way, or the system will behave in a similar way. So if you're consistently inconsistent, then you can apply this, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. It's like, for example, we have this team, and there were so many new members. So you would not count days before those new members joined, because then the system was completely different, right?
Exactly.
So it might be that if you have a big change in a team, in the variables of your structure and organization, you might want to start counting from that point when it's changed.
And this is also, more is not always better. I mean, if you would take 2 years of history, are you still working the same way as you did 2 years ago? And if so, you maybe have another problem. Speaking of continuous improvement, right? So this is why usually maybe something from a month to 3 months makes sense, because it accounts for all the stuff that happens with bank holidays, vacation, people getting sick, people going to see the dentist, whatever things happens in life, right? And usually you have that covered in this 1 to 3 month period. But think a bit about, how does your future look like, or what does represent kind of your future best? It's not because I'm saying 30 days makes sense. It's kind of universal truth. It's just my experience, which usually I get good results with it.
Okay, so you take from 1 to 2 months of data.
Yes.
And we look at work items completed, so the throughput.
Exactly. So this is the throughput, and you see it's kind of listed, or in a run chart where we see individual days. So you have some days where there was nothing. maybe there was a public holiday, for example, so people were not working or something else happened that is left up for interpretation. You have days where we closed 1 or 2 things. You have that outlier where we closed 7 things. Very interesting. Curious to know what happened there. But that's kind of like, this is how the last 30 days, more or less, looked like for this team. And that's all you need to run a Monte Carlo simulation. Now, should we go through kind of how a simulation would work? For example, if we would like to know how many items we're closing in the next 7 days, do you think that makes sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Or maybe quickly one step back, right? Because we said probabilistic forecasting, we said Monte Carlo simulation. Just to explain, like Monte Carlo simulation is a tool to create the probabilistic forecast, and the probabilistic forecast is what I would say the difference to an estimate is it gives you a result that includes a probability. So it's like 70% likely, 50% likely. So with a percent and kind of a range. So you can say we managed to close 5 items or more, or will be done 70% with a 70% chance by end of June or earlier, right? So that's kind of the range, like this date or earlier, or this many items or more. So you get a range and the probability.
So you get somehow the cycle time as well, right? Because that depends on what you are after, which is probably just a time frame that you have. So if you want to know how many items you can do in a given time frame by the end of June, it's like, end of Q2, everybody wants to know what can be done by then. So we could predict it this way. And also if we have sprints, right, 2-week sprints, you can predict how many items you could potentially do with a certain probability. So here we go from, this is the estimate, that's one number, that's for sure, to there is this probability that in this certain amount of time, you can do this number items or less with 85% of probability, depending on your risk you want to take and you want to show it with. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's always a second part, right? There's an 85% chance to manage, which means there's a 15% chance that we don't. Are you okay with 15% risk? It seems reasonable to me, but depending on what you're doing, if your customer will fine you €500,000 if you don't manage, maybe you want to go for 95% chance, right? So if it's taken from your bank account, maybe.
And on the other side, if somebody gives you $1 million, if you do this in a month, somehow you will make it work, but that won't be your system. It wouldn't be a stable system. That would be something that you put like an expedite for everything, right? So you
can argue maybe you win €1 million if you manage, and if you don't manage, you maybe lose 20K, and then you can argue we have a 50% chance to make it. Maybe that's worth the risk. Maybe we can risk these 20K with the upside of getting 1 million, right? But this is then what this probabilistic forecasts allow us to do, is to do risk management, essentially. And we're making this transparent. We're not saying yes or no. We're saying there is a chance. There is also a chance that we don't manage. Are you okay with this? Or what kind of risk are you willing to take based on the data, not on somebody's feeling or how they woke up this morning, if they feel optimistic or pessimistic?
Exactly. And that's actually the good segue to why it's named Monte Carlo simulation, because that's Stanislav's uncle, who was a gamer. He was going to a casino in Monte Carlo. And that's where the name comes from, because it's really the risk and the gain, right? What you want, what you're comfortable with presenting. And that also changes the conversation that you have with the stakeholders. You no longer talk about like absolute numbers, this will happen, and that becomes your deadline, and that's the end. But you really talk about the risk. So we have this.
Can I just add one more thing? Because I think it's important, if you are using averages for your planning, for example, average velocity or whatever, it usually means that this is about a 50% chance, usually. So you're just not exposing that risk, right? So you're just assuming like, hey, we use the average to plan, and then we sell it as this is the plan, this is going to happen, while in reality, there may be 50% chance or less based on your data, because averages are not always there. But I think you're just not making this transparent if you're using averages. So even if you use averages, but then expose this number, I think you would have different conversations.
Nice. This is really eye-opening. I didn't think about it this way.
Yeah.
But yeah, true. That's what it is. And we somehow hold on to those averages so much, right?
It gives us certainty, right? Which we like, I think, as humans. It's good to have certainty.
Yeah. Cool. So,
all right.
Yeah, let's start from how does that work. So we have our throughput, we have the historical data, and what now?
So just one more thing, and then we can run through it. Sorry, like what Monte Carlo allows us to do is answering two questions. It's how many items will we get done until a certain day? And or when will this specific amount of items be done? So you can either answer how much do we manage in a week, or when will my 17 items be completed? Right. So those are kind of, it's a similar thing we're doing. It's just kind of the question is a bit different.
So it can be differently put. So let's give an example. For example, you have a sprint. So how many items can I fit in a sprint?
Yes.
But on the other way around, you have a feature, an epic with a number of items in it, and you want to know when this will be done. So those will be the different use cases.
Exactly. And I think for the sake of the example, the easier question to demo is how many items will we get done in the next, let's say, 5 days? And just then we don't have to do that much math with 5 days. So what we normally do, this is the input, like this is this throughput run chart. If you use 3 months, 2 years, it would just be longer, but that wouldn't fit our screen size. So we took 30 days here. And what you do, we want to simulate how much do we get done in 5 days. So we need 5 times a random number between 1 and 30, because we have 30 items in our input. So give me a random number, Maria, if you don't mind.
25.
25. Now I don't have it numbered, but it's somewhere here, and it's 0. So today we got 0 items done. Bad luck. Now we roll 24, for example, and we hit the day where we got 2 items closed. So on day 2, we closed 2 items. So we can take a note of this. So we have first day 0, second day 2, third day, maybe we roll a dice and it says 1. So again, 0 items done. So not a good day. So we need 2 more.
14.
Let's say 14. That's about here. So we say it's 4 items. That was a good day. Good roll, Maria. I hire you for rolling the dice. So we have 0, 2, 0, 4, and the last roll will be a 30, where we closed 1 item as well. So now we simulated 5 days by rolling kind of individually 5 numbers and then looked up in our throughput how many items did we close, and we had 0, 2, 0, 4, and 1, which gives us a total of 7 items. So, Maria, will you be happy if I tell you you will close 7 items in the next 5 days?
I wouldn't be unhappy. It's
But
more than 1 per day. So imagine, it's like if you want to know until the end of the week how many items we can close, if you tell me 7, that's super unhappy.
But you remember our definition of a probabilistic forecast. It has a probability and a range. So I can give you a range. We will close at least 7 items in 5 days, but I cannot give you a probability yet.
Exactly.
Because we ran 1 simulation now for 5 days. So what we're doing is we're doing this a second time. I mean, we don't have to do it now again with the dice rolling, but then you can imagine you maybe get the higher number or a lower number. If you're really unlucky, you hit zeros always, and then you will have a simulation that says you will get 0 items done in those 5 days. And the cool thing about computers is they're very fast at doing this, and you can run 10,000 simulations, and that's usually the number which you want to have to get meaningful results. And then you have 10,000 results for, like, you can imagine, like, you have 10,000 parallel universes, and you have the same team doing the same thing 10,000 times, and then you have different results. And then you can see, oh, in 50%, in 5,000 of our universes, we closed 3 items or more, for example, in those 5 days. And that's kind of how you then get this probability out. So,
do you have something that could show us what that looks like?
Yes, the results, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So this is, I was well prepared. So this is basically, if you say on the x-axis, you see how many items did we close. And if you see the screen, we have a very tiny bar, very, very, very unlucky. And there were like 1 or 2 simulations where we closed 0 items, which sucks a bit. But that is a possibility. It's very, very unlikely, but it can happen. You also have extremes on the other side. So there are simulations where you close 20 or more items. You remember we had this one outlier where we closed 7 items a day. If you're very lucky, you just roll this number 5 times, and then you have like this, oh, we're super good. Every day we're closing 7 items, right? But normally what happens is you get somewhat this normal looking distribution, and you have the most tries kind of somewhere in this center, if you would visualize it. And then you can say, for example, you have this 50% bar, which means it's at 7 items closed. So you had 50% of all our simulations were closing 7 items or more. They're basically on the right side of this red bar. And this gives you your 50% chance. So it would mean, oh, and even we had on 7 average in our random simulation. So I like that it matched.
Yeah. And then and then you can move, because that's like, even realistically thinking, 7 items sounds like a lot given what we saw on that previous one, right? So here we can give the typical 85th% where we have this 15% of risk, and those
exactly 5 items would be this. So, and this is kind of how we construct this bar. And maybe what I like to use is as a comparison, if you flip a coin, you would assume we have a 50% chance that you hit head, for example, or tail. But if you do it twice, you will, I mean, maybe you get one's head and one's tail, but it's not very likely necessarily that this happens. If you do it 10 times, it's not a given that you have 5 of each, right? But this is this law of the large numbers. So if you do it 10,000 times and capture the results, you would most likely get somewhere quite close to 50-50. And this is kind of a similar principle that the simulation here works to get kind of the most realistic outcomes based with some risk. So
yeah, I remember somebody once told me that when you roll the dice doesn't remember what number it got. So for us, it's already like, oh, I throw 6, so for sure I will not throw 6 again. Like, no, the dice doesn't remember it threw 6. It might throw 6
in the casino,
again.
it's like if you play roulette, right? So it was red 3 times in a row, so the chance is higher that it's black coming up next, which is like, no, it's not. It's the same chance as before. We as humans just think it's not.
Exactly. We believe in this luck. This is lucky, and you cannot get that lucky, right? So yeah. And this again talks about this intuitive versus real. When we sometimes fall into our own trap of that's intuitive.
And maybe if I may add 1 or 2 sentences about what I would call accuracy of the simulation, because it's a simulation, it will never be right or wrong, because even if you have 95% chance of making something happen, there is a 5% chance that you don't. So if it doesn't happen, you may just be unlucky, which is fair. But if you see in the visual, if those lines, if 95 and 50 are rather close together, it means that you have a bit higher accuracy, I would call it. So in a perfect world, let me switch back. Now, if you paid attention before, let's assume we would close exactly one item every single day. There would be no outlier. Then it would be perfectly predictable. And then 50% would be the same as 95%, right? Because it doesn't matter what we roll, it will always see the same number. And then it would be very like the result would just be one bar because it's always the same number. Then you're perfectly predictable. Not realistic, but just I like to explain it like this. On the other extreme, we have 35 items closed. If we have one bar that is just once in this 30 days, we closed 35 items in one day and all the others are 0. What will most likely happen is that in our results, we have many items on the very left where we have 0. And if we get super lucky, we hit the 35 like 3 times and have like more than 100 items closed. And then there's like 50% chance that you get a ton of items done and a very low chance to get anything done. And then it's not really useful as well. Right. So we actually had this case once where there's a 50% chance that you get this feature in 2 weeks. There's an 85% chance that you get it in like 8 months. And so, yeah, you cannot use this data because if you tell this to a stakeholder, they're like, what? I can't do anything with this. So this is not like the simulation will work in any case. It's just that the results may not be as useful. And this is something you can actively do when you focus on flow to close the link to other flow metrics as well, that like the outliers, even if they're high up, are not necessarily good. So from a predictability point of view, you want all the bars to be exactly the same height, like knowing that this was not the ultimate goal, but just to understand how you would get predictability in that way. It heavily depends how you distribute it over your chart. So you want an even distribution or continuous flow rather than many zeros and a huge bar at the end, as you sometimes see with Scrum teams, for example, that close everything at the last day of a sprint.
Exactly. That was my point. Like, this can happen, really. And that's only well, first of all, it's the Jira hygiene, right? That we need to make sure that our data is reliable. And when we close something, we actually close it. So, and we move it. That's why I always talk about walk the board on daily, because otherwise you never close stuff. It's like, I finished it there, whatever, next. But on the other hand, it's also the stability of the system that we always talk about in Pro Kanban to make sure, and there are a lot of ways to create better predictability and stability of the system, so we don't have so many outliers that the data will not really give us much help.
And predictability is something you do, right? So you have to be active. It's not something that you randomly get by chance, but it's something you can do or you must do. But,
exactly.
You have to take action.
For example, going back to that, what I showed on hold, right? If you notice you have basically dependencies with 2 teams, maybe there's a way to break that and get a team member to your team, because they have the knowledge that you don't, so you always wait on them. So there is those different ways of breaking that. And another one is looking at the work item age, which we spoke a lot in the previous episode, where we can really spot that something is already becoming an outlier and we are spending too much time in the system, and that will change our metrics and the way we can use them later, right? So now I would like to see, because this is the tool that you created, that we can use for free. So it's thank you for that. And how do you plan? So if we take those two use cases that we mentioned, one is you have a team, you want to know how many items they can finish in the next sprint, and not use the capacity planning of the who's not here, who will be here, and make sure all that. And second one would be the feature. So we have this big feature. How do we plan?
Yes. So I just shared the tool I'm developing. There are others out there, so you can use it with whatever floats your boat. But I'm advertising a bit for my own tool, and this is kind of the data, real data that we use, which shows how fast are we, or we're tracking ourselves, like the development of the tool with our tool. So it's a bit the meta level. Anyway, this is based on these forecasts. And what you can do is, for example, let's say today is the 3rd of June when we record, and our sprint is a week. So I learned that cool teams now just have week-long sprints. So let's do that. And we can say then, how many items do we get done till the 10th of June? I hit forecast. And we can see here, ignore the other numbers. So how many items will we get done till 10th? If we really want to be certain, it's 1. Kind of 95% chance. And we're confident about 2 items. It's realistic that we get 3, like 70% chance. And it's risky, but not impossible to get 5. But this tells me if Maria wants a new feature on this tool, and I will need to do seven stories for that. It will not happen till next Tuesday. Sorry for that.
Okay. So this is the part of when you define a date, and this tool already has all the metrics from your team from Jira.
Exactly, Jira or Azure DevOps. And also you see, you can just hit the forecast button, and it takes literally seconds, which is nice. So that's all the capacity planning you need. So if it takes it takes longer to open your Excel spreadsheet with the capacity planning, then do this kind of plan.
And what if we take 2 weeks, like the typical team?
Sure. 2 weeks. Then, 4 items seem realistic now. Or certain almost. And 6 to 8 items are probably what I would plan for if I would make a commitment to you now. So I think you can have your feature on 17th. Unless we discover other stuff.
I like this better.
Anyway, I'm not working in sprint, so you just told me your feature requirements, and I gave it like a ballpark estimate or t-shirt size that most likely this is about 15 user stories, right? And I want to know, when will this be done, independent of kind of sprints. So I can say, when are 15 items done? And I hit the forecast button, and I see if it's really important, I have a contract with you, Maria, and you will fine me if I'm not delivering at this date. I will probably say you will get it 7th of July. That's when I feel really certain. But we know each other. Like we do contracts, but no fines. Then I will say, well, you can expect it end of June. I think that's fair. So, and if you say, is there any chance you're going to this conference on 24th of June, and is there any chance to get the feature out before? I would tell you there is, but maybe plan for not having it. So you go with 2 options to the conference, right? But I'll do my best. And the nice thing about this, which we haven't talked about, tomorrow I have 1 day less, like till this date, but maybe I close 2 items, or maybe we increase it by 1 because I figured something out. But so if tomorrow I only have 14 items, I would forecast, and then we see, things changed, right? Because we don't want to do a plan that is static and that we never look at again until it's too late, but we want to forecast this continuously, which is the coolest thing about the fact that it's based on your throughput data, which you most likely have in Jira or Azure or whatever you use. And it's so fast, you don't need people's time to do it. And last but not least, if you know both, like, oh, we need 15 items and Maria needs it by, what did I say, 23rd? If we forecast, you get a likelihood to close 15 items by this day. And then we can say, oh, actually, I closed 3 items today, so I can rerun it. So, oh, no, the chance is a lot higher. And I can run this tomorrow again, or I can run it like this tool actually allows you to set it up that it just reruns it every 2 hours based on your data from Jira. So as a PO, for example, you can just check out the data every day and see, is it developing in the right direction? You shouldn't panic if something goes up or down, but if you see we went from 85% to 80% to 75% to 70%, it's like, yeah, maybe we should do something about it.
Okay, this is interesting. That wow, this gives you so much information. And the colors, if you hover over, they show you the percentage. Okay, so it's
Exactly.
95, 85,
70 and 50.
Okay, wow, that's it's like blowing my mind to how easy it seems compared to what we are killing ourselves over. And this only takes into account. So what you need to do if you have a feature, you basically need to split it into stories. Like those will be the titles of the stories. You don't even have to have them refined yet, right?
Exactly.
It's more than anything like doing a user story map. You know how many stories you have there, and then you run it, and then you know more. Maybe you will find out there will be 20, not 15, and then you
and then maybe I tell you it's not realistic. Is there something valuable that we can do with 10 stories that is useful for you, right? Because the whole point of this is not to blame anyone. This is creating transparency based on your data, and then you have to act on it. And this may not always be a pleasant conversation, but it's one that people, at least once they get used to it, I think are valuing. Like when you reach out to your stakeholder telling, hey, the data doesn't look as if we could deliver on what we initially thought. Like we can either move, this is most likely with what we know today, when we will be done with the thing, or what could you live without? So we're kind of focusing on the correct things now. Or, hey, we promised you to deliver this, or we committed somewhat to delivering by the end of June. We realized we seem to be faster. So do you want it earlier, or do you want something more? Because we could fit a small other feature in as well. So whatever makes more sense in your context, right?
That's so nice, because usually we don't have this conversation. We have like, oh, we are not making it. It's a week before. We see it too late, and people
it's this watermelon metrics, right? It's like green, 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 red. And then it's too late. And I think people like stakeholders, C-level folks, like upper management, whoever you're reporting to or kind of delivering to, they understand that things are not plannable. I think what is not appreciated is this kind of lie that everything is always green until the very last moment, when it turns out we're nowhere close to finishing. And I think that's what upsets people. And then you go into this kind of vicious circle of, or like you go down this rabbit hole of, well, this sucks. This cannot happen again because we realized so late we have to invest more in planning, which brings up even bigger Excel sheets for even more planning.
Exactly. And we never have this other conversation about like, okay, now we see this is gonna get done 2 weeks later, because we see it here, right? We already can give you the prediction, the forecast. And if the forecast is, maybe it will still improve. Like it's not written in stone that it's so bad. It's now trending worse, but it can still get trend. So you talk about the trends, you talk about totally different thing than just like blaming game. And trying to accomplish the impossible of, okay, we will plan better and we will just like sweat ourselves with the Excel sheets. That doesn't make any sense in 2 weeks.
And what Lorenzo, my favorite PO, always says is, even if it's equally bad than whatever you're doing now, it takes 5 seconds. So you just save the time you spend for whatever else you're doing. And that's already an improvement, even if it's not better than what you're doing right now. And I truly believe it's better, but even if it wouldn't be, it still makes sense to do it like this. Because you save time.
You still save time. And you don't get so frustrated with wasting so much time on something.
Your developers probably like you more because they're not forced to fill in Excel spreadsheets or playing story poker game thingies, and they can focus more on what is generating value for them, for the company. So
we have only wins here from what I see.
I think so.
Great. Thank you so much. It was very interesting. And I still think it's a long way for many companies to actually embrace the fact that you don't have to sweat in over analysis to provide a better estimate. That's somehow the intuitive thought, right? Oh no, it will be, I need to suffer so I can actually even justify, it maybe wasn't perfect, but I suffered. So, I did my work. So then people are less angry. I don't know, but that's I think the mindset. So here, just clicking once on the button is just mind-blowingly fast.
We often get the question because people are confused. It's it sounds too easy, right? Because it feels like it's better, whatever that means, more accurate, and also takes very little time, and it kind of doesn't compute, or it feels wrong, right? Even when I'm telling it's it's hard, it sounds too good to be true. So, but I would really suggest if anyone wants to start, you don't even have to expose this to the whole company or to the team, right? You can just try to run it, see what the forecast says, and then see if it matches reality more or less, or kind of compare to what the estimate was or the plan was in your sprint, for example, if you're doing Scrum. So you can collect some data on would this work or not. And there's a lot more that you can do to become more predictable, but I think you can just try it out initially and see how well it performs.
And sometimes get super upset with the data because it will show how long it really takes for your team to deliver. But that's also my approach. Instead of totally throwing out one approach and introducing a new one, do both for a while and see if at least it's not worse. If it's not worse and you gain so much time, that's already such a big win.
Yes. And I wouldn't underestimate the kind of the good faith you get from your team if you save them time, right? So this is an improvement. You're causing the removal of an impediment if people can focus more on what they were hired to do, which is creating value, not to create plans, I would say.
Yeah. So that we always have to think about not only the stakeholders, but also the team that is suffering in the middle of all of this, right?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time and explaining it. It's really mind-blowing, and I want to only use this forever now.
So until we find something better, right? So
exactly. Let's see if it inspired anyone. Please let us know in the comments. We would love to hear from you if you got inspired and you found that this can actually and how you also manage then the stakeholders and explain to them this new thing, or maybe you don't and you just do it behind the scenes until you get confidence enough to just show it that this is actually how you do it, which is also, and I think that's a very good idea too.
Yeah, it depends on your context and the level of safety or bureaucracy you're having, and every company is different, so try whatever works for you. But I think there's no reason not to try if you're interested. You have the data and you don't have to tell anyone necessarily. So
we're not at all forcing or encouraging anyone to break the rules. Not at all. That's not our not at all. Okay. Thanks so much. It was great to talk to you again, and see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and have a nice rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.